Hello friends, I'm back with another wonderful story. In this episode, we'll be listening to the story of Theodore, Nova, and Queen Victoria. Grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and enjoy the show. The alien queen married her barren daughter to a human man, and now she's shocked to see her grandchildren. The thing about crashing a warship, Theodore decided as the ground came up to greet him at an unreasonable speed, was that no amount of diplomatic training prepared you for it. 12 years of treaties, 3 languages, 1 commendation for de-escalation under pressure, and none of it told him which lever stopped a burning ship from kissing a desert made of glass. He pulled the lever anyway. It was, in hindsight, the wrong lever. It played music. So the meridian came down over the singing sands of Veth to the tune of what his onboard system insisted was soothing arrival ambience, plowing a smoking trench 2 kilometers long through dunes that chimed like struck crystal wherever the wind touched them. The ship stopped. The music did not. Theodore hung upside down in his harness, blinking at a cracked viewport full of twin violet moons, and said with great dignity, "Well, that's the deposit gone." Veth was beautiful in the specific way that things which want to kill you often are. Beyond the wreck, crystal spires rose from the horizon like the planet had grown its own cathedrals and forgotten to tell anyone. The sand sang, genuinely sang, a low glassy hum that rose and fell with the breeze, and somewhere in his concussed skull Theodore registered that the temperature was pleasant, the gravity was forgiving, and he was almost certainly about to be arrested by aliens. 2 out of 3. He'd had worse first dates. He got the harness open, fell on his head, apologized to the floor out of habit, and crawled out into air that smelled of ozone and something floral and faintly menacing. His translator unit, a fat silver disc clipped to his collar, standard issue, allegedly foolproof, chirped awake, and immediately began mistranslating his own thoughts back at him, which was a new and unwelcome feature. The scouts found him 20 minutes later. There were 6 of them, tall and silver-eyed and armed with the kind of elegant weaponry that suggested a culture which had gotten very good at both art and violence and saw no reason to keep them separate. They looked, Theodore noted with the small hysterical corner of his brain that stayed conscious during disasters, almost exactly like humans, the same faces, the same wary eyes except for the ears, which swept back long and tapered, catching the moonlight like they were listening to something he couldn't hear. Probably his blood pressure. He raised his hands. He smiled. He engaged the translator, cleared his throat, and delivered the single most important sentence of his career. "I come in peace," said Theodore. The disc considered this. Then it announced warmly to 6 heavily armed strangers, "I taste of peace." There was a pause. One of the scouts tilted her head. Theodore's soul left his body and hovered near the crystal spires. "No," he said, "no, that's the asterisk unit said I don't taste of anything, please don't." He tapped the disc. It chirped happily. He tried again, slower, as if slowness had ever fixed a machine in the history of the universe. "I am a diplomat. I am a delicious diplomat," asterisk the disc offered, doing its absolute best. The lead scout, the one who tilted her head, lowered her weapon a fraction and said something that came back through the disc as, remarkably, asterisk not asterisk about food. That he was the human then, the one the sky had promised. She said asterisk promised the way you'd say invoiced asterisk, which was the first Theodore had heard of any promise. As far as he knew, the sky owed nobody anything. Least of all a mid-tier envoy whose largest previous achievement was stopping a trade dispute over fermented moss. But he had learned over 12 years that when an armed person tells you the universe has been expecting you, the correct diplomatic response is to smile and go quietly and figure out the rest later. So he went quietly. They loaded him onto a skimmer that moved without wheels or sound, gliding over the singing dunes toward the spires. And as the sky temple swelled from a smudge into a mountain of pale marble and impossible light, Theodore learned the parts of the story he'd crashed into the middle of. 2 worlds, his and theirs, one bad morning away from a war that would salt the stars. A treaty held together with hope and spit. And a queen, a tall, glacial, terrifyingly practical queen, who had apparently been waiting a very long time for a symbol. Something to bind two peoples together where words had failed. Theodore did not yet know he was the symbol. He was mostly thinking about the ears and the moons, and whether delicious diplomat would follow him for the rest of his natural life. The temple doors opened. They were the size of a small moon themselves, and behind them the air rang like a held breath. "Okay," Theodore murmured to no one, straightening a jacket that was singed, torn, and heroically beyond saving. "First impressions, you've got this." His translator helpfully agreed. "You taste of confidence." Queen Victoria did not so much sit on her throne as preside over it, the way a mountain presides over weather. She was tall even by Veth standards, which made her roughly the height of a bad decision, and she wore the border wars on her like a second set of armor, gray at the temples, silver in the eyes, and an expression that suggested she had personally outwaited 3 sieges, and a diplomat's charm was not going to be the thing that cracked her. Theodore walked the length of the throne room feeling every one of his singed threads. 200 silver-eyed courtiers watched him do it. His translator, mercifully, had chosen this moment to stay quiet, which he assumed meant it was saving its strength for something devastating. "So," said the queen when he reached the foot of the dais. Her voice arrived through the disk smooth and unhurried. "The sky sent me a man who fell out of it." "Technically I steered," Theodore said, "poorly, but there were choices involved." A muscle near her mouth did something that was not quite a smile, and filed for divorce from the rest of her face before it could become one. She studied him the way a jeweler studies a stone that might be valuable or might be a very confident piece of gravel. Then she said the thing that rearranged his entire week. "You will marry my daughter." Theodore's brain, which had survived a crash landing and a translator implying he was food, briefly stopped participating. "I'm sorry," he said. "The unit's been unreliable. I heard * marry." "You heard marry, * the disk confirmed, unhelpfully. The queen explained with the patience of someone who had run out of patience years ago and was now operating on reserves. 2 worlds, 1 treaty thin as temple glass. Words had failed. Blood had not yet been spilled, but it was warming up in the wings. What both peoples needed was a symbol nobody could argue with, a union, human and Veth, standing in one body of law where no claws could reach. And she happened to have, close at hand, a daughter for whom such a marriage cost the crown nothing at all. Nova was cursed, the queen said, in the flat tone one uses for weather reports. Barren by an old temple verdict, which made her, in the queen's cold and frankly upsetting arithmetic, the ideal bride. A symbol that would produce no heirs to complicate the succession, no hybrid to feed old prophecies. A closed door with a lovely frame. "You're describing your daughter," Theodore said carefully, "like a spare room." "I am describing a solution," said Victoria. "You are welcome to prefer the war." He did not, on balance, prefer the war. Nova entered from a side arch, and Theodore's first impression was that someone had told her about all of this roughly 90 seconds before he'd been told, and she was taking it with exactly the grace he would have. She was human lovely in a way that startled him, the same face his own people wore, but for the long ears sweeping back through dark hair, and eyes of that molten Veth silver that seemed to be doing math on him. She looked him up and down. The singed jacket, the wrecked dignity, the silver disk still occasionally chirping like a bird that had learned one insult. "This is it," she said to her mother. "This is the treaty." "He steered," said the queen, "poorly, but there were choices." "I like her," Theodore told the room. The wedding was 3 days later, which was 3 days less than Theodore felt any marriage, political, romantic, or hostage, deserved as a runway. It took place beneath the great dome of the Sky Temple, where the twin moons poured violet light through crystal until the whole hall swam in it. And it involved, for reasons never adequately explained to him, a live ceremonial lizard. The creature was the length of his forearm, iridescent, deeply unimpressed with the proceedings, and its role, according to the Ficition, according to the disc, according to 8,000 years of unbroken Veth tradition, was to be held between the two joined hands of the couple as a witness to the vow. A living seal, sacred, solemn. It bit him, not hard. A nip, really a small territorial reminder that Theodore had cold hands and a stranger's smell, but he flinched, and Nova, holding the other end of the vow and the other end of the lizard, felt the flinch travel through the animal and made a sound. A very small sound. The sound of a woman who has been auctioned to a falling man in front of 200 courtiers and has just watched a sacred reptile draw first blood, and has decided, against every instinct of dignity, that this is the funniest thing she has seen in a cycle. She turned it into a cough. It did not survive as a cough. Theodore, bleeding gently onto a holy lizard, caught her eye and lost the war too, and for one breath, under the violet light, in front of everyone, the two most reluctant people on Veth were both trying not to laugh at the same thing at the same time. The queen watched this. Something flickered behind the silver of her eyes, too fast to name, gone before it settled. She had arranged a symbol, cold and closed and safe. She had not accounted for the lizard. Marriage, it turned out, did not come with instructions, and neither did living in a wing of the sky temple the size of a small city with a woman who had every reason to resent you, and a lizard bite that had, against all odds, become the fondest memory of the week. The wing was theirs now, a diplomatic fiction, two people sharing an address the way two continents share a coastline, close but determinedly separate. There were rooms Theodore could walk through for a full minute without reaching a wall. There were floating loom globes that followed you at a respectful distance and dimmed when you yawned. There was, crucially, a great deal of silence, and Theodore had never in his life been good at silence. "You're humming," Nova said on the fourth evening from across a hall so long it had its own weather. She was reading something that scrolled in light above her palm, and she did not look up. "I hum when it's quiet." "It is quiet because I have arranged for it to be quiet." "Then we've found our first marital disagreement," said Theodore. "I feel we're ahead of schedule." She looked up at that. The silver eyes did their arithmetic. Then she went back to her reading. But the corner of her mouth had betrayed her, and Theodore counted it, privately, as a diplomatic victory on par with the fermented moss. They thawed the way glaciers thaw, which is to say slowly, and with an enormous amount of grinding noise. He taught her poker, using chips made from the iridescent scales the ceremonial lizards shed twice a cycle, and discovered to his cost that a woman raised in a court of silver-eyed schemers reads a bluff the way most people read large print. She took him for everything 3 nights running. On the 4th he tried to introduce the concept of the pun, and she listened to "The temple has no bathrooms because the architects believed in holding one's water," with the grave attention of a scholar receiving terrible news about the universe. "That is not funny," she said. "It's a little funny. It is an attack, on me specifically. That's how you know it's working." In exchange, she taught him the flora, which on Veth was less a hobby than a survival skill, because roughly a third of everything beautiful in the temple gardens could stop a human heart with the enthusiasm of a hobbyist. She walked him through beds of glass-petaled blooms under the twin moons and narrated, in the same warm, even voice, which ones would merely make him ill, and which would kill him before he finished apologizing for touching them. "That one, no. That one if you must. Not that one. That one only if you wish your blood to become a gas." Theodore kept his hands in his pockets and fell, without noticing the exact moment, into the habit of watching her talk. Because they were, both of them, the wrong shape for this court. That was the thing the poker and the flowers were really about. Nova was the cursed princess, the closed door, pitied in the polished way courtiers pity someone whose misfortune is convenient for them. Every silver eye that slid over her carried the same soft verdict, and she had built a whole armored self out of pretending not to feel it. And Theodore was the alien nobody trusted, the man who'd fallen out of the sky and been welded into the succession, whose translator still occasionally announced to a corridor of nobles that he tasted of confidence. They were the two great outsiders of the Sky Temple, and outsiders, it turns out, recognize each other across any distance, in any language, even through a disk that thinks *hello* means I am your delicious enemy. So the jokes were a rope bridge. He'd catch her eye during some interminable court function, the minister of water droning, the incense thick enough to chew, and murmur through the disk's low channel that the minister had now been speaking for so long the twin moons had aged, and she would hold her composure like a fortress, and he would watch the fortress lose. She started doing it back, drier than him, crueler, better. She had a way of saying of some pompous lord, he was born on third base and believes he invented the base, that made Theodore inhale his own drink. And somewhere in there, between the poker chips and the poison gardens, and the shared low warfare against the court stairs, the armed truce quietly stopped being armed, and neither of them filed the paperwork. It was late, both moons high, when it slipped. They were on the long balcony, the singing sans a distant silver hum far below, and Theodore had said something about the stars being differently arranged from home, how he could no longer find the shapes he'd grown up with, and Nova had gone still, and then said, without her usual armor, that she knew what it was to look up and not find yourself in anything. And Theodore, who was a diplomat and knew exactly how forbidden this particular room was, a real marriage where only a symbol had been ordered, did not make a joke. That was the mistake, or the beginning of one. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and the silence he'd always been so bad had held them both, and neither reached for the rope bridge, because for one long violet-lit moment neither of them wanted to cross back. Then far below, a ceremonial lizard shrieked into the night like a dropped kettle, and they both jumped and laughed, and the moment let them go. But it had happened, and they both knew it had happened. And on Veth, that was the most dangerous thing either of them had done yet. A man in love and out of his depth will do many foolish things, and Theodore chose the temple archives, which on Veth was the intellectual equivalent of juggling the poison flowers. The archives were a vaulted deep beneath the Sky Temple where memory itself was stored. Not in books, but in crystal, 10,000 years of Veth history hanging in the dark like frozen light, each shard humming faintly with the voices of the dead. You asked a question by touching the right crystal, and it answered in a whisper only your bones could hear. Theodore, who could not read a word of Veth script, had exactly one advantage: the disc. He set it to record, whispered his question into the humming dark, and asked the one thing he could not stop asking. He asked about the curse. He told himself it was concern. It was a little. Mostly it was that he had spent 3 months watching the whole court pity a woman for a wound he had never once seen bleed, and something in the diplomat's part of him, the part trained to notice when a story has been sanded too smooth, had started to itch. The crystal he wanted did not want to be found. It was shelved deep, behind protocols and dust, in a section the disc translated as *verdicts, sealed, which is not a comforting name for anything. When he finally laid his hand on it and asked, the whisper that rose into his skull was not a physician's diagnosis. It was a * prophecy. Old, in the cracked parchment voice of some long-dead oracle, and it said nothing at all about Nova's body. It said that a child of 2 worlds, human and Veth, born where no such child should be, would either bind the stars into one piece or set them all alight, unite 2 peoples or burn them both. The prophecy did not clarify which, because prophecies never do. Clarity would put oracles out of business. There was no curse. There had never been a curse. There was only a prophecy, and a queen who had looked at it, done the terrible cold math she was so good at, and decided the safest hybrid child was one that was never permitted to exist. So she had sanded the truth into a barren princess, a closed door, a verdict sealed. She had not cursed her daughter. She had * filed * her. Theodore stood in the humming dark and felt something in his chest go very quiet and very hot at once. He was still standing there when the second thing happened, which was that the archive lights shifted. A servant, somewhere above, drawing back a shutter, and he realized he had been down there long enough that the twin moons had traded places, and that he needed urgently to talk to someone about a sealed verdict, and could think of exactly one person who deserved to hear it. He did not get the chance that night, because that night the Queen left for the border. The wars had flared again out past the glass deserts, some feud he only half understood between banners he could not tell apart, and Victoria departed the way weather departs, abruptly, totally, taking the pressure of the whole palace with her. She left instructions. She left the treaty. She left at the great doors one last unreadable look aimed at her daughter and her daughter's fallen-from-the-sky husband, a look that Theodore would spend a long time afterward trying to decode. Then she was gone, and the Sky Temple exhaled, and for the first time since the crash Theodore and Nova had the enormous echoing place almost entirely to themselves. Which is when Nova made her own discovery and turned the whole abstract dread of the prophecy into something with a heartbeat. She told him on the balcony, both moons high, in the same place the silence had first held them. She had gone to the temple physicians about a matter she assumed was ordinary, fatigue, she said, a strangeness she'd blamed on stress and court poison, and being married to a man who hummed, and the physicians had run their humming crystal scans, and had gone quiet in the specific way that people go quiet when they are looking at something they were told could not be. And then they had told her there was no curse, she was not barren, she was, in fact, extremely, undeniably, terrifyingly the opposite of barren. Theodore looked at her, Nova looked at him. Somewhere far below, a ceremonial lizard shrieked into the night like it had been waiting 3 months for exactly this cue. So, Theodore said when he could speak, the prophecy, the one about the child who either unites the galaxy or sets it on fire. Yes, said Nova, the one your mother lied about and buried and married you off specifically to prevent. Yes. And he gestured vaguely at the universe, at the two of them, at the entire violet-lit situation. We've gone and done the one thing. We have gone and done the one thing, Nova agreed. He sat down. He put his head in his hands. Then, because he was Theodore, and because terror and joy in his chest had nowhere else to go, he started very quietly to laugh, the helpless, out-of-his-depth laugh of a man who had steered a burning ship into a singing desert and somehow found something worth all of it. Unite the stars or burn them, he said. No pressure on the asterisk baby. And Nova, sitting down beside him under the twin moons, put her hand over his the first time, the real first time, and started laughing too. They kept the secret the way you keep a fire in your hands, carefully, constantly, and with the growing suspicion that it was going to get out no matter how you cupped your fingers. 3 cycles is a long time to hide a prophecy from an entire court, and it is a considerably longer time to hide 2 of them, because there were 2. The physician's crystal scans had hummed and split and shown twin lights curled together, and Nova had looked at the image floating above the physician's palm and said, in the flat voice of a woman recalculating her entire future, "Of course there are 2. Why would the galaxy-ending prophecy come asterisk singular?" Theodore had laughed until he had to sit down. Then he had done the math on twins and stopped laughing and sat down again for a different reason. They came under the twin moons, as everything on Veth seemed to, in a birthing chamber sealed by 3 bribed servants, and 1 physician who had been sworn to a silence so total, she communicated for a week afterward entirely in nods. A boy and a girl, Owen and Hazel. And when the physician cleaned them and held them to the violet light, Theodore's heart did something no diplomatic training had a protocol for, because there they were, the impossible children, the ones who were never supposed to exist, and they had Nova's ears, long and delicate and already twitching at every sound, and they had his eyes, warm and brown and utterly human in those small silver-world faces. two peoples folded into two tiny furious bundles, screaming their arrival at a galaxy that had bet against them. "They're perfect," Theodore whispered. "They're asterisk loud," said Nova, exhausted and luminous and already unmistakably in love. "They're perfect and loud, they're diplomats." Fatherhood revealed Theodore to be a man of enormous love and almost no competence. A combination he approached the way he approached everything, which was to narrate it. He changed diapers like he was diffusing ordnance. Approaching the target, conditions nominal. Oh no. Conditions are not nominal, we have a breach. This is not a drill. He carried the twins through the sealed wing in the crook of each arm and briefed them, in a low, serious murmur, on the tactical situation. "That's a loom globe. It's a friendly. That's a poison flower, hostile. Do not lick. I cannot stress this enough. We have already discussed this, Hazel." Hazel, 3 weeks old, ignored him with the total sovereign contempt she would refine into an art over the following cycles. And Nova, who had spent her whole life being pitied as a closed door, watched the man she had been sold to build blanket forts against a prophecy. And something in her that the court had spent decades sanding smooth grew back sharper and warmer, and entirely her own. She would find him at odd hours asleep on the floor of the nursery, a twin on his chest, the disc still murmuring softly beside him. It had, over 3 cycles, mistranslated the children's babble into an unbroken stream of things like "I taste of destiny" and "the small one demands tribute," and neither of them had the heart to fix it. It had become the family's 4th member, a useless, beloved oracle that got everything wrong. For 3 cycles, behind sealed doors and bribed silence, they had something the whole crystal-spired planet would have called impossible. An ordinary life. Small and hidden and gloriously mundane, a pocket of warmth folded inside a palace of intrigue. The twins learned to walk by pulling themselves up on the poker table. They learned to laugh, and their laugh, a bright doubled ringing thing, became the sound Theodore measured his days by. He would have crashed the asterisk meridian 1,000 times over, into 1,000 singing deserts, for exactly this. But a pocket of warmth inside a palace is still inside a palace, and palaces have arithmetic of their own. His name was Adrian, and he was the war minister, and he had the specific patience of a man who counts things. He had begun, in the Queen's long absence, to count the sealed doors of the diplomatic wing. He counted the servants who went in with more food than 2 people could eat, and came out saying nothing. He counted the physician who no longer attended court and communicated in nods. He counted the strange doubled sound that carried, on still nights, down a corridor that was supposed to hold only 2 quiet, cursed, childless people. Adrian was not a clever man in the way Nova was clever, all silver-eyed speed. He was clever the way water is clever, patient and low, and always finding the crack. And he had read the sealed verdict too. He knew what a hybrid child meant. He knew what an army would pay to hold one, or to end one, and he had already decided which side of that prophecy he intended to be standing on when it came true. The night the Queen's return was announced, her banners sighted past the glass deserts, 3 days out and closing, Theodore stood in the nursery with a sleeping twin against each shoulder, and felt the walls of their small hidden world lean quietly inward. Nova came and stood beside him in the dark, and neither of them said anything for a while. The twin moons poured through the window. Somewhere below, a ceremonial lizard shrieked its idiot heart out at the night. 3 days, Nova said finally. 3 days, Theodore agreed. He kissed the top of Hazel's head. "You hear that?" he murmured to her. "Grandma's coming. Try to unite the galaxy before dinner. No pressure." Hazel, asleep, demanded tribute. Queen Victoria came home the way she had left, like weather, total and abrupt, the whole palace's pressure changing the instant her skimmer touched the temple courtyard. 3 cycles of border war had worn her down to something harder than before, all edges, the silver of her eyes gone flinty. She had crossed glass deserts and settled feuds and salted at least 1 rebellion, and she wanted, in the specific way that exhausted monarchs want, Nothing but her own throne room and an hour of silence in it. She strode the long corridors trailing dust and ministers. She waved off the reports. She reached the great throne room doors, which parted before her like water, and she stepped through toward the seat she had held for 40 years. And stopped. She stopped the way a machine stops when someone pulls the wrong lever. Completely. Mid-stride. One foot still lifted. Because at the foot of the dais, in the pool of violet light that fell from the great dome, her daughter Nova sat on the marble floor, not on a chair, on the asterisk floor like a servant, like a child. And around her, laughing, were two small people. Two, a boy and a girl, perhaps 3 cycles old, chasing a shed lizard scale that skittered across the polished stone. They had dark hair. They had, sweeping back through it, long, delicate ears that twitched at the sound of the opening doors. And when they turned toward the noise, toward the towering, silver-eyed stranger frozen in the doorway, they looked up at her with eyes that were warm and brown and human. Their father's eyes, set in small faces that were, unmistakably, half of Veth and half of somewhere very far away. The queen made no sound. That was the terrible part. Theodore, standing off to the side with his heart trying to leave through his throat, had braced for a roar. There was no roar. There was only a silence so absolute it had weight, the silence of a woman watching everything she had buried 3 cycles deep stand up on small legs and giggle at her. "Mother," Nova said, and rose and put herself, quietly, without drama, the way you'd step in front of a blade between the queen and the children. Victoria's gaze moved. It moved from the twins to her daughter to the human, and back to the twins, and something in her face was doing frantic, silent, 40 years of statecraft arithmetic and arriving, for the first time in Theodore's memory of her, at no answer at all. When she finally spoke, her voice came through the disc very low and very even, and evenness from Victoria was more frightening than any shout. "There is no curse," she said. It was not a question. "There was never a curse," said Nova. "There was a prophecy, and a lie you told to bury it. I know, we both know, we've known for 3 cycles. The queen closed her eyes. When she opened them, the flint had cracked, and underneath was something Theodore had never once seen there, not rage. Fear. Naked, ancient fear. The fear of a woman who had spent her life trying to outmaneuver a single line of oracle verse, and had just watched it toddle across her throne room chasing a scale. "Do you understand what you've done?" she said. "Do you understand what they are? A child of 2 worlds unites the stars or it burns them. 2 of you thought it was a curse. I told you it was a curse because a curse is a thing you can pity and forget. But it was never that. It was a countdown. And you have," her voice, impossibly thinned, "you have made asterisk too." "We made a family," Theodore said. He hadn't meant to speak. The whole room turned. He was aware of 200 years of protocol he was breaking, and did not, in that moment, care about a single one of them. "You keep saying what they are," he went on quieter, "like they're a weapon someone left armed on your throne. They're not. That one demands tribute, and this one licks things she shouldn't, and they both wake up at an hour that should be illegal. And last week Owen called a loom globe asterisk grandmother because it was tall and glowing, and he'd never met one. They're asterisk children. The prophecy didn't make them. We did. And the only person in this room treating them like a countdown is you." For a moment, one long violet-lit moment, it hung there, and Theodore genuinely did not know which way it would fall. Victoria stared at him. Nova stared at her mother. The twins, sensing nothing of galactic consequence, resumed their war over the lizard scale, and Hazel won it, and shrieked in triumph in a pitch that made the disc chirp, helpfully. "The small one has claimed the territory." And it might have gone either way. It might have gone toward blessing or toward disaster. Except that it went toward neither yet, because a 4th voice slid in from the shadow of the doorway, low and patient and pleased. "So it's true," said Adrian. He had been there long enough. That was clear from his face, the war minister, the man who counted things, standing just inside the great doors with an expression of quiet, terrible satisfaction, like a man whose long arithmetic has finally, beautifully, come out even. The barren princess, the cursed door, and behind it he inclined his head toward the twins, almost courteous, the two most valuable children in the galaxy, living proof of the prophecy. An army would cross the stars for them, Majesty. His silver eyes moved to the queen, and his voice dropped to something almost gentle. The only question is whether we hold that army, or whether we let someone else. The queen turned to face him, and in that turning, Theodore watched something in her recalculate one final time. The fear, the 40 years, the sealed verdict, the small brown eyes at her feet, all of it dropping into the cold and ruthless machine that had made her terrifying in the first place. The countdown, whatever it was, had just reached its final numbers, and every single person in the room could feel it. The queen looked at Adrian for a long moment, and Theodore braced himself to do something heroic and almost certainly fatal. Then Victoria did the last thing anyone in the room expected. She smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a woman who has just been handed by an overconfident enemy exactly the lever she needed. An army would cross the stars for them, she agreed, her voice smooth as temple glass. You're right, Adrian, you're so very right, which raises a question I'd have thought a war minister would ask first. She descended a single step of the dais, unhurried. If these children are worth an army who told you that, you read a sealed verdict. A verdict only I had the authority to seal, which means you broke into the crown's own memory to read it. Another step, which means, minister, that everything you know about the most valuable children in the galaxy, you learned by committing treason against the throne. In front of the throne, while the queen was standing on it, Adrian's satisfaction curdled, his mouth opened. The guards outside those doors, Victoria continued pleasantly, heard every word you just said, including the part where you wondered aloud whether we should hold the army or whether you should hand my grandchildren to someone else. She let that sit. I've salted 3 rebellions this season, Adrian. I found each of them the same way. A patient man, counting things, standing a little too close to a door that wasn't his. The flint came back into her eyes, and this time it had a floor under it. You counted very well. You simply forgot that I count too. The guards took him. He went the way patient men go when the water finally closes over their heads, quietly, and too late. And then it was just the family, and the queen, and the 2 small hybrids who had, at some point during the greatest political confrontation of the century, gotten hold of Theodore's translator disc and were now taking turns yelling into it. I taste of destiny, asterisk the disc announced in Owen's delighted voice. Hazel grabbed it. The small one demands tribute. Victoria stared at them. 40 years of statecraft, 3 cycles of dread, 1 prophecy she had spent her whole reign trying to strangle in its shell, and it was sitting on her throne room floor mispronouncing asterisk grandmother into a broken diplomatic device. The prophecy, she said slowly, says a child of 2 worlds will unite the stars or burn them. It does, said Nova, still between her mother and the children, still braced. I spent your whole life, Victoria said, reading that as a threat or burn them. I heard only the fire. She lowered herself, the towering, glacial, terrifying queen, down onto one knee on the marble, to the height of 2 astonished toddlers. It never occurred to me to read the other half. That the same child who could burn 2 worlds could be the only thing in the galaxy capable of asterisk joining asterisk them. That a hybrid isn't a crack running through a treaty. It's the stitch that holds 2 edges together. She looked up at her daughter and the fear was gone, and something rower and more honest had taken its place. I filed you away to prevent a fire, and in doing so I nearly missed the piece. Owen, 3 cycles old and utterly unafraid, walked up to the kneeling stranger, considered her long ears so like his own, reached up, and yanked one. There was a silence in which Theodore's entire life flashed before his eyes. Then the Queen of Veth, Salter of Rebellion's terror of 2 worlds, said, "Ow," and laughed. A real one. Rusty, astonished, decades out of practice, but real. The rest came the way the last pieces of anything come, once the hardest one is set. Victoria stood before both courts, human and Veth, and did not hide the children. She presented them. Not as a scandal, not as a weapon, but as the treaty itself made flesh. Proof, laughing and loud, that the two peoples were not merely capable of peace but had already, quietly in a sealed wing under the twin moons, made it. The prophecy that had been a countdown became a foundation. The union Victoria had arranged as a cold transaction. She blessed a second time, kneeling, this time and meaning it. And Theodore, who had crashed out of the sky as a mid-tier envoy whose greatest triumph was fermented moss, stood in the violet light and understood how far he'd come. He had arrived tasting of peace by accident. He was leaving having built it on purpose, not through any treaty he'd negotiated, but through the one thing 12 years of diplomacy had never taught him, and 3 cycles of blanket forts had. That you don't unite 2 worlds with clauses. You do it with a family stubborn enough to be ordinary in a place that swore it was impossible. The man who couldn't sit still in silence had learned to hold it on a nursery floor, a twin asleep on his chest, the whole galaxy briefly, perfectly, at rest. Victoria proved a disastrous grandmother. She had ruled 2 worlds and could not, it emerged, win a single argument with Hazel. She addressed the twins in full court diction and was ignored with sovereign contempt. She tried to teach Owen statecraft and he taught her instead to yell nonsense into the disk, which she did once when she thought no one was watching, and which Theodore absolutely saw. They stood together on the long balcony that last violet night, all of them, the singing sands humming far below, the crystal spires catching the light of the twin moons. 2 worlds that had been one bad morning from war were now one large, loud, impossible family, and the stars overhead were arranged in shapes Theodore no longer needed to recognize, because he had finally found himself in something. Hazel yawned. The disk, ever faithful, ever wrong, translated it. The small one, it murmured, is at peace. For once, it had gotten it exactly right. Theodore looked at the broken little oracle, then at his wife, then at the terrifying queen bouncing a half-alien grandchild she'd once tried to prophesy out of existence. You know, he said, for a device that's been wrong about everything since the day I landed, it really stuck the landing better than I did. And beneath the twin violet moons, on a world made of glass and light, even Victoria laughed. The end. We've come to the end of another very enjoyable story, friends. I hope you liked it. Please don't forget to hit the like button, leave your thoughts about the story in the comments below, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. See you in the next story.